Dystopia and the dumbest bill in America. This is Mark Fisher with Mark and the Millennials. And the millennial joining me today is, of course, Christopher Hopkins, our producer on the other side of the camera. And we have with us Delegate Matt Morgan.
Thank you, Mark.
One of our favorite guests to have on Mark and the Millennials. We're happy to have you back, Matt.
Back by popular demand.
Absolutely back by popular demand. So this podcast, ladies and gentlemen, is called Democrat Dystopia. And it's just a podcast about all of the bad stuff that you would do, or all of the stuff that you would do to ruin a country. And that's the kind of dystopia that you would create. That's what they're doing. That's what the Democrat Party is doing. So first up, we have an incredible story. You know how about the gas prices that you're paying and how high the gas prices are? Well, the United States has oil and it's sending it overseas. Okay, we are sending oil overseas. This is not from a conservative paper or online newspaper or site. This is from Reuters. Okay, Reuters. Houston, July 5th. More than 5 million barrels of oil that were part of a historic U.S. emergency reserves release to lower domestic fuel prices were exported to Europe and Asia last month, according to data and sources, even as U.S. gasoline and diesel prices hit record highs. The export of crude and fuel is blunting the impact of moves by U.S. President Joe Biden to lower record pump prices. Biden on Saturday renewed a call for gasoline pipeline suppliers and others, saying, basically blaming them. Right. So that's the big thing. We all know that. The Biden administration and Democrats are like, the prices are high because the really big, bad gas station owners are making the prices high just artificially. Meanwhile, Joe Biden, according to this article by Reuters, is sending U.S. gas and oil overseas. Overseas. So in other words, we have less of a supply than we would normally have if we just kept it right here. And so it further says, about 1 million barrels per day is being released from the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, that's SPR. Through October, the flow is draining the SPR, which last month fell to its lowest level since 1986. U.S. crude futures are above $100 a barrel, and gasoline and diesel prices above $5 a gallon in 1/5 of the United States. So case in point, ladies and gentlemen, in our state of Maryland, gasoline is $5 a gallon or higher. Generally speaking, I was in Virginia yesterday and gasoline for mid-price gasoline was $4.64. The difference? Oh, taxes. Of course, gasoline taxes. The state gasoline taxes are that dramatically different between the two states, Maryland and Virginia. I'm sure you have a similar situation depending on where you live. So we're going to ask our guest host here about Democrat dystopia as it relates to U.S. oil reserves being sent overseas. Matt.
Well, I think it's funny that Democrats, this story's coming out because it's not like they released this oil trying to make the lives of the American public any better. They did this because the election is around the corner, right? And they've only extended it until the election ends. So, it's kind of funny that it's just turned around and kind of bit them in the butt, because this is what their policies are. Now, I would be for this if they were maybe exchanging it for baby food or maybe baby formula.
Yeah, well, that's one option. And then the Democrat dystopia continues, because you would think that what they would do, Matt, is they would look overseas and say, look what's happening in Germany, look what's happening in Western Europe and Eastern Europe with respect to the lack of supply of energy, because they are going, full blown into renewables and getting away from oil and natural gas and nuclear and so forth. You would think that the Democrats would look at that and say, hey, that's what it looks like when you are dependent. It's very dangerous because you are dependent on regimes.
Russia.
Yes, Russia. Why don't they get it? That's my question. Let's just talk about why don't they get it?
They're creating the dystopia because of their goals of the utopia. They want alternative energy. They don't, and an alternative energy they want is solar, wind. Got to repay their donors. Yeah, I mean, that's where they're at. They just think there's going to be, you come home and you plug in your car and this will save the world. It's their religion.
It is a religion. And then it's interesting because there's even an example in Sri Lanka, because in Sri Lanka, they decided to get rid of fertilizers, which take a lot of energy to be able to make. And Sri Lanka has gotten rid of fertilizers that are artificial fertilizers for a variety of reasons, because they said,
because they grew too much food.
Yeah. And also because of the climate, it's right. Like the climate agenda of the UN, United Nations, and the New World Order. They are actually beginning to starve in Sri Lanka. Because in Sri Lanka, it says here, and this is in the Daily Caller, it says, Sri Lanka is in a last-ditch effort to stave off economic collapse after an allegedly climate-friendly ban on artificial fertilizers devastated one of the country's largest industries, which is agriculture. And so in Sri Lanka, you not only have massive inflation and you have massive fuel shortages, but you actually have now poverty. People are actually going backwards in time. And so when we talk about Democrat dystopia, we're talking about their policies at the global level, pushing these policies on countries that clearly don't know any better, or thought that everything would be fine.
They're subscribing to the New World Order.
They are.
Which is the same as Joe Biden. I mean, if we're willing to send oil over there, how much corn and wheat are we willing to send over there?
True. True. And the thing is the United States of America, we're going to be feeding the rest of the world for some time to come. But we all thought it had to do with the lack of energy reserves, that, people didn't have enough fuel to power their tractors. That's actually what I thought. I thought that was the primary issue. Apparently, there are these other issues too, where countries followed the United Nations and the New World Order folks and said, oh, we're going to get rid of all fertilizers because we don't really need those anymore to be able to feed people.
Look, you look throughout world history, fascists always try to control the food population, how much food there is. Look, I think we're set up for this. Isn't about energy anymore. This is just about bad decision making from like a central government point of view.
It's Democrat decision making.
It's Democrat. Yeah. I mean, that's where their party is right now.
It's incredible.
And look, I mean, and it goes back to the same policies we have here in our country where we're paying farmers not to grow.
Yeah.
Like, what sense does that make when food prices are at an all-time high?
Well, you don't want deflation, of course, because then people would no longer be able to afford to do things. And obviously growing food is a unique, it's a unique thing unique profession, because you can get wiped out by the weather. And so through no fault of your own,
big risk.
You're taking these big risks. So you do need a Department of Agriculture. You do need these things. But the thing is we thought, at least I thought, that the biggest issue in the world today was the cost of energy, and there would be people that wouldn't be able to feed themselves because in the Ukraine, they mine much of the world's fertilizers, right? Well, there's only one problem. There are parts of the world, apparently, like Sri Lanka, that have decided to not use fertilizer at all, and now they're starving. Now the people, I mean, what the heck? Who does this?
Well, I mean, they do it.
Democrats.
I mean, look, the population of the world is going up. We don't really have any more farmland than we had 20, 30 years ago. The reason why we produce more food is the technology breakthroughs, like with seeds and fertilizer.
In the U.S. especially, we are the leader in ag technology. There's no doubt about that. I mean, John Deere, for example, we've talked about this before, actually has a tractor that drives itself. It's a battery-driven tractor that drives itself.
Autonomous.
And it's completely autonomous. So it's planting seeds, and then it senses where in the field. I mean, you could have a field that's 1,000 acres, and the tractor actually senses where the field needs the fertilizer the most, and then fertilizes, just that specific area. I mean, and there's no human inside the tractor.
I mean, there's no doubt that the United States and entrepreneurial leadership that comes from this country can figure this out. The only thing that can stop them is the party that wants to regulate cow farts.
That's right. And that's interesting too, because in I think it's the Netherlands. There's an article, and I didn't bring that article up.
Yeah, I saw that on
There's
the news.
There's an article. I mean, in the Netherlands, they're trying to say to the Dutch farmers that they can no longer have cows. Is that what it was?
But no longer have cows, and the farmers are protesting. They had their tractors out. They shut down traffic. But it's interesting. I guess there was some shootings. Like, I mean, it's getting very violent over there. And the one video I saw, they had all these like almost like squat vehicles, like the heavy duty vehicles kind of coming down on the tractors. And the farmers took their combines. For your viewers out there, the combines are like these big, huge pieces of equipment that you use to gather up grain and corn. And it was almost like the scene from Cars where Frank was chasing the cars. That's what the combines looked like. It was like chewing up the police cruisers. It's like, well, Frank's going to get you.
But isn't this
look,
interesting?
I mean, you got to push back against this. It's insanity. They've lost their minds.
So here's the thing, Matt, and for all of you out there in podcast land, you know, Matt and I, while we represent areas that are, you know, suburban, we also represent areas that are rural as well. And what's interesting about this is if you have the climate people and the Democrats saying, get rid of fertilizers, okay? Get rid of artificial fertilizers. You can't fertilize these fields. You can't do corporate farming, if you will. And then you say to yourself, okay, well, what if I have a garden and I want to fertilize my garden? So I have an example. This is an example from last week. So I called my neighbor. He lives about a mile down the street. Hey, what can I say? And I know he has cows. And I said, hey, do you have any like cow manure that I can use? He says, oh yeah, I've got cured cow manure. So for those of you out there that don't know, if a cow manure has been sitting for a certain period of time, it literally becomes soil. It no longer looks or smells like cow manure. It just becomes this really dense soil. And so he delivered it. He had a Kubota tractor. He brought it over and then dumped it into the garden. And then the idea was to distribute that around each of the plants.
All your food is vegan.
That's right. And so here's my thought process on this. This is where I'm going. You got Democrat Dystopia because they're saying you can't use artificial fertilizers if you're farming or you're gardening or what have you. And then they're saying we don't want cows anymore. That is to say they want to destroy the cow population in the United States because they don't want cows farting and the flatulence and all that stuff. And they don't want you eating meat. So then how do you fertilize the fields and fertilize your garden?
You don't. I mean,
so then how do you eat? How do you eat then?
They dried the food supply back to the same as it was really before the 1800s.
Because here's the thing. If you garden, right, or if you're a farmer, you know as well as I do that when you plant your crops or you plant, let's say you have a garden, you plant your tomato plants, your pepper plants, squash, whatever you're planting, at the end of the season, you've pulled out a good amount of nutrients out of the ground, okay, a good amount. And then the field is fallow over the winter time, you know, because we have a winter here. It's fallow that for a solid 2 seasons. And then you come back and you're like, well, gee, I would really like to augment the soil and add something to it that would make it more fertile. And if you really want to garden like organically, it would be cow manure. I mean, that would be like the key. And they're saying no cows. This is what I don't understand. It's like, look, ladies and gentlemen, if you don't want to eat meat, right? You decided you're going to be vegan. You don't want to eat any meat. You don't want to eat poultry. Fine. But do you realize that the vegetables that you're eating, that when they're grown, they require fertilizer in order to produce enough food to feed the world?
Well, I mean, look, they're going to make a push. This is so out of date, Mark. 20th century. I mean, Democrat Utopia. I mean, they're going to be growing this on their rooftop buildings in the city. You know, this has to deal with, didn't we have a bill on that at one point?
Yes, they're going to have
urban farming or something.
Urban farming. It's like an oxymoron, you know, I'm going to farm in the middle of the city. It's like, look, first of all, when you walk in the middle of the blue cities, you die because they try to shoot you or rob you. So why wouldn't they steal all the food from your garden if you're going to have a garden in the city, right? Hey, look at that tomato. I'm going to get me that.
Yeah, it's just really shocking to see the rest of the world going down this rabbit hole of this lunacy.
It is. It is. We have some more Democrat dystopia. A Democrat Senate candidate who has a massive college debt supports getting rid of college debt.
Shocker. Shocker.
So a Democrat candidate running for U.S. Senate in Arkansas is running on a platform that includes wiping away student debt. But a financial disclosure that she had to file, which was reviewed by the Daily Caller News Foundation, shows that she has tens of thousands of dollars in outstanding student debt. Natalie James, a realtor who will face off against Republican Arkansas Senator John Boozman in November, has between $50,000 and $100,000 in student debt. They're loans, of course, but it's debt nonetheless. That's what her filing says when she filed it last week. James, this is the person with the debt, graduated from the University of Arkansas at Little Rock, according to her campaign website. Her debt was incurred in 2003 and has a 2% interest rate for a 30-year period, the financial disclosure shows. So here's what's interesting. She's virtue signaling out there that she wants the government to pay off of her debt, but she's running for office and will have a unique opportunity to vote on that very bill that would benefit herself. So that's Democrat dystopia, right? You're not responsible for your decisions.
Well,
that literally is the definition of the Democrat Party.
Look, I believe in working together and solving problems. The first thing Ms. James should do is get in touch with the Biden administration and have Joe come out there and yell at the college. Like, just like the gas station operators say, lower the price, like the senile, escaped.
I'm surprised his college, when he spoke to the college, I'm surprised he didn't have all the cars out there like during the election and everybody's in the car, instead of actually in the audience.
It wasn't on the cue card. He didn't read it. That's the problem. Look, I mean, you're not canceling debt. You're transferring this debt, right? I mean, this is transferring this debt onto the taxpayer. And look, I mean, this is just another person that's obviously oppressed, that she's ran up this much college debt. I've always keep hearing all these people are like, oh, you got to go to college. You'll make so much more money. And I'm like, well, why are we relieving debt from them then at this point? If you made so much money, why can't you pay your own debt?
Well, because the people that went to college, the geniuses that are now in the White House, have policies that are causing people to starve. And the last time I checked, there are a lot of people in the farming community who are going to be just fine if there is a shortage of food, right, in the United States of America, and also farmers across the planet. But the people that aren't going to be fine are the elites, because the first thing those farmers are going to say is, you caused this. You're the one that needs to do without.
Well, on the college debt deal, I would love to go back and, in the name of transparency, maybe she should release exactly what she purchased to run up this much debt. Because I'm willing to bet it's not college classes and textbooks. I'm thinking there's living expenses on there. She probably got a nice computer. Look, you can even buy a car with some of these college loans out there. So I feel I do feel that some students are taking advantage on this, and ultimately it should be the institution that should have some skin in the game and hold the note on some of these loans, make them viable. But right now, this is just virtue signaling to her base, saying, I'm with you. Education's good. Education's a right. They love to call stuff rights.
We always knew, of course, as a country, because the founding fathers in the Federalist Papers warned of this too, which is, there's always that danger at some point that you can have a tyranny of the majority as a result of just promising people stuff. And that is now happening in real time. And there's an entire party that has invested itself into promising you free stuff in exchange for your vote.
This is the reason why they've become socialists over time.
And then, it's not eventually Marxist.
Right.
If they're not already. They kind of already are.
Well, to me, the degree between
concerned.
socialist, Marxist, communist, it's just the degree of force you're willing to take.
True. That's very true.
So when colleges can't, when there's no more money to borrow at that point, do you start forcing instructors to work for free? Does government take over those institutions? They're state-sponsored institutions.
Each person should work according to their ability and to take according to their need, according to Karl Marx.
I was thinking Thomas Jefferson said.
So this.
You won't read that in the Federalist Papers.
Get this. Speaking of Democrat dystopia, ladies and gentlemen, the teachers union.
Oh, speaking of socialists.
The teachers union is planning to vote, get this, on mandatory masking and an enemies list and rejecting the words mother and father. The National Education Association, the NEA, had their annual conference, which is underway as we speak. And the teachers union, which is represented by the NEA at the national level, is voting on calling for a national policy of mandatory masking, creating an enemies list, and rejecting the words mother and father. The Chicago conference is chock full of woke agenda items and progressive language involving issues that would seem to have little to do with the proper education of your children. The unabashedly leftist organization doesn't even seem to recognize its own heterosexual male membership, at least according to one measure in circulation. Quote, NEA is a social justice union that is a majority female and trans and gender nonconforming foi. F-O-I-X, I guess it's in French, it's foi, but it's because it's foix. I don't know. One new business initiative says calling to publicly stand in defense of abortion and calling abortion limits an attack on students, families, and communities. These are the people that teach your children.
But CRT doesn't exist.
No, see,
Gender identity in our schools, that's non-existent.
Of course not.
That is a right-wing conspiracy.
Another calls for a national policy of mandatory masking and COVID vaccine in schools.
And look, Mark, if you...
In schools. And dude, the pandemic is behind us.
Well, I mean, look, they're science deniers. I mean, it's not like the masking issue actually worked in the first place. I mean, there are no men, so there's the pandemic still exists. You got to wear a mask. Yeah. Look, and if you disagree with anything you just said,
Chris, wait a minute. Our millennial has something here.
You're a school. You're not a doctor's office. It doesn't matter.
Yes.
It's an education.
It's like,
well, they know
you don't walk into the school and the principal say, pull down your pants. All right, turn your head and cough. Oh yeah, here's a guy.
Right. So why are they administering vaccines?
Yeah, that I have had a problem with that since this all started. And the argument you'll get from the teachers, not necessarily just the teachers union, but a lot of the teachers, not all of them, but some of them, is there are so many children that show up whose parents just don't care about properly giving health care to their children. And that does exist, that the school that has fallen on the schools. My issue is we've made it so easy for people. They're like, well, I'm not going to do it at all now. I'm not going to bother worrying about my child.
Well, I mean, that definitely happens, but it always bothers me when the school starts taking rights away from parents. And look, school health, I mean, there is a population that does benefit from that because they're neglected and they live in disadvantaged areas. But the overwhelming majority of people across the country take care of their children. And there's no teacher that I've ever met that cares more about my child than me.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's really the problem.
A father and a mother and a mother and a father.
You're right. Well, apparently not. So you have what is it? A birthing person? What do they call the father?
Well, the League of Women Voters sent me an email saying that they were really upset with the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion because it offends and is against birthing people. And I'm like, this is the League of Women Voters. It's like
birthing people.
Women. It's about women's suffrage and right to vote, which is part of the reasons. Sorry, it's part of the reason why it was created. And then meanwhile, they're saying birthing people. It's like, so being a woman doesn't matter anymore to the League of Women Voters?
They should change their name to the League of Birthing People.
But what do you call the father? What's the term that replaced the father? Like sperm giver or something?
That's right.
Like if you have birthing people, what's the name of the father?
Yeah.
Anybody?
Yeah.
Bueller?
Bueller.
But look, if you disagree with any of this, Mark, I'm sure you can end up on the Attorney General's list for being a domestic terrorist.
So the NEA, get this, it continues, will publicize its commitment to, quote, young people's right to learn about and to develop their own sexual orientation and gender identity. That's what they intend to do in K-12. A fourth thing that the NEA wants to do is promote language for LGBTQIA plus inclusive. I have no idea what those stand
Divided sign.
for. Including using birthing parent and non-birthing parent instead of mother and father. Literally, it says it right here. This is what they want to do. This is what the Teachers Union of the United States of America wants to teach your children. Talk about inappropriate. Talk about, I mean, it's just like, how dumb can we become as a society?
Well, but look, Republicans have a huge opportunity here. Conservatives have a huge opportunity to start fighting back and pushing back on this. You just saw last week at Arizona push through an amazing school choice bill. And I can't wait to see how that's the first state that has a real school choice program. And look, I think that takes off throughout the country because parents
not in the blue states, because in the blue states they will the teachers unions own all the politicians.
They do. Well, then just let the blue states start suffering. I mean, look, the one good thing about the abortion law that was passed,
the Supreme Court's ruling on abortion, sending it back to the states.
Right. I mean, this gives blue-leaning people excuse not to move to red states.
It's true. And
I mean, maybe that should be one of the requirements. Well, you don't agree with this. Maybe it's just you stay in New York, you stay in California, leave Tennessee, Texas, even Virginia. Leave it alone.
So we started a new segment on Mark and the Millennials a few weeks ago called "Welcome to Dystopian California." Kind of like the Eagles. Welcome to the Hotel California.
Where you can check in and you can never leave.
That's right. And this is Welcome to Dystopian California. Rob Bonta, he's the Attorney General of California. He has added 4 states to the California travel ban. Remember, you're in the United States of America, and one of your states, ladies and gentlemen, has a travel ban. So California AG Rob Bonta adds 4 states to the gender law travel ban. Rob Bonta, this month, banned travel by employees using state funds to 4 additional states because he said they prohibit men from competing in women's sports. The new states under the ban, which applies to employees of state agencies in California. So in other words, if you work for a state agency in California and you have to travel somewhere on behalf of that agency, you cannot travel to these states that they're adding because those states don't allow boys to compete in girl sports and vice versa. The new states under the ban, which applies for those employees that work for California, the California State University included, and the University of California and its Board of Regents, are Indiana and Utah. And those were added on July 1. Louisiana and Arizona. The ban is already in place for 20 other states. So California now prohibits its state employees from traveling to 24 states in the United States. And here's what Bonta said, the Attorney General of California. Quote, "Make no mistake, there is a coordinated, ongoing attack on transgender rights happening right now across the country. Blanket legislation targeting transgender children is a solution in search of a problem. It is detached from reality and directly undermines the well-being of our LGBTQ plus community, MOUSC." So this is Rob Bonta saying that the crazy people are the people that don't think children should have the right to be the opposite sex, including getting puberty blockers and, God knows what else.
Well, look, they try to push a lot of these policies under the name of being tolerant. But let's face the fact. I mean, this is grooming at this point. They're passing this. It's cross tolerance. It's grooming. And it's a major agenda item for them. Now, reading this and seeing it's already in 20 other states and now it's 24 states, I'm just like, let me get this straight. California state government employees can no longer travel to 24 states. I'm trying to figure out how to get our state on this list. Because I would like less people from California state government in my state.
Oh yeah, by all means. The crazy Californians. I mean, obviously California is a massive state and there are plenty of regular, normal, great family people in California.
And a lot of them have been moving over the last 10 years.
True. And others are just stuck there because their lives are there and they can't leave, but they otherwise would. But you're right. On those crazy Californians, please, by all means, stay in California. But can you imagine you're signing a ban? So let's just say you work in California for the Department of Agriculture. And in California, the Department of Agriculture has decided that they're going to send 100 people from the Department of Agriculture to, let's say, another state like Arizona, because Arizona, which is also an arid state, very dry, has figured out a way of growing a new crop in a new way using a new technology. And oh, by the way, we have a shortage of food. Food prices are through the roof. Apparently, Arizona has figured it out. And so you fill out the paperwork and give it to the Department of Agriculture in California and say, I want to travel to Arizona to learn about this new way of growing food. It's like the best way to do it, apparently, and I want to learn. No, you can't do that because they don't allow women to play in men's sports and men to play in women's sports, including boys to play in girls' sports and girls to play in boys' sports. So therefore, you cannot travel and learn how to feed people. We'd much rather starve.
I remember the days of true liberalism when they're like, we need separation of church and state because we don't want your values pushed onto us. Where the hell are those people at nowadays? It's funny, I woke up this morning, turned on the news, and I saw that Gavin Newsom was vacationing in, I believe, Montana, which is one of the states you're not supposed to be traveling to.
Well, of course, they're
a bunch of hypocrites.
It only applies to the deplorables. You're going to say something, right, Chris?
Is it only work-related travel or any travel?
I think it's work. If you work for the state agencies,
state-related travel, and
the state's going to pay your way to go travel to go to another state to learn something, you're banned from traveling to those other states because education isn't really important. What matters?
But Chris, I can almost guarantee that Gavin Newsom, the governor of California, I'm willing to bet he took security with him.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, absolutely.
So look, I mean, this is virtue signaling. At its worst, they're hypocrites.
They are.
I thought the United States, united we stand, divided we'd fall, and it's like some of the blue areas, especially on the West Coast, are so off the rails. They don't even want to be part of this country anymore.
That's what they're saying.
If you can't travel there,
it's a travel ban.
Yeah.
Isn't it funny? I mean,
just secede then. Do it.
Yeah. They're stopping interstate commerce because boys can't be girls and girls can't be boys. I mean, it's just ridiculous. Only in California. But that's the thing to our podcast listeners. That's why we're doing this segment more regularly now called Welcome to Dystopian California, because it really does. And by the way, Rob Bonta, for those of you who don't remember, Rob Bonta was a former state legislator in California who also put in a bill that was the California exit tax. It would tax you if you tried to sell your assets and then leave California. It would tax you on a certain amount of assets. I think if you had $10 million or more, something like that. Just if you left.
If you moved out of the state, then you got taxed for leaving.
Exactly. So then in California, when you come up with these brilliant ideas, you actually get promoted by Gavin Newsom. So Gavin Newsom appointed him to Attorney General. Just idiots.
Where you could do more harm.
Exactly.
And help others.
And that's Welcome to Dystopian California. Next up, podcast listeners, we have the dumbest bill in America. And do we have a lead up, Mr. Producer? Here it is. Dum 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 dum. And it's the dumbest bill in America, and it is requiring gun buyers in New York to provide their social media handles. Okay. It's true. Requiring gun owners, when they apply to get a gun, or if they have a gun, to provide all of their social media information and handles. So, ladies and gentlemen, the New York approves gun law requiring buyers to provide social media handles. Yeah, you heard that correctly. So this is in Fox News. New York Democrat Governor Kathy Hochul signed a new gun control bill just last Friday. She did it even after the Supreme Court ruled last week that the state's rules that make it difficult, if not impossible, for New Yorkers to obtain a concealed carry permit were unconstitutional. She didn't care. She and the legislature still passed this bill. This latest legislation was signed into law shortly after New York's Democrat-controlled legislature passed the proposal. Of course, Hochul couldn't wait to sign it. Hochul, had called the legislature back to Albany on Thursday of last week. So in 24 hours, she called them back for an extraordinary session so that they could work on the bill in response to the Supreme Court's decision. The law, struck down by the Supreme Court, said that gun owners would have to demonstrate proper cause to receive a concealed carry license. The new law will require people who want to purchase a handgun to hand over a list of social media accounts that they have maintained over the last 3 years, so officials can verify their character and conduct. Now, first of all, how would you verify someone's character? How would you necessarily define their conduct? Well, that's going to be up to the liberals and the progressives in New York State, because the whole idea is to quell free speech. So you quell free speech by getting your social media handles and tell you need to get rid of those social media handles. And that way, and only then, will we give you a right to own a handgun and a concealed carry permit. Well, then you think about it, it's like, well, then what that's doing is it's preventing your First Amendment rights. So no sooner did the Supreme Court of the United States say, no, New York, you're trying to stop people from exercising their Second Amendment rights. Now, New York State is saying, we want to deny you your First Amendment rights in order to give you your Second Amendment rights back.
And it probably violates the Fourth Amendment, too. Look, the Constitution is really not the Constitution. It's more like guidelines for these people.
It's more like guidelines.
Yeah.
Wasn't that the captain on
Pirates of the Caribbean? Yeah. These are like guidelines.
More like guidelines. Isn't that the Pirates Code?
Yeah. I mean, that's what it is to the left.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's like guidelines.
Right,
yeah.
Right.
When it works for them, then it's good.
Right,
and then otherwise,
it's becoming like a joke.
Exactly.
To them.
Let's just stack the Supreme Court, and that's at least that's what they're saying.
Right. Well, that would fix it. I mean, for them.
Can you believe this, though? Here's the point. The state of New York just got slapped across the face by the Supreme Court of the United States. And the Supreme Court said, look, the Second Amendment is not like a suggestion. You can't deny people the right to concealed carry just because you've decided. I mean, there's this thing called the Second Amendment. And then New York State's like, we're going to have a special session. We're going to call all the members of the state legislature back in. And everybody agrees, like the Democrats who control the state legislature in New York at least agree. The governor agrees. They call back in, they go back in, they meet, and within 24 hours, they have a new bill. And the bill is like, you first have to provide all your social media handles for the past 3 years, and we're going to review it before we give you your concealed carry license, and we're going to decide whether you have the character and conduct to have a... What is the difference between that and what they did before?
So let me get this straight. So you have to turn over your social media accounts before you can exercise your constitutional right.
Yes, that's what they're saying.
Can they apply that to voting? I mean, but think about it. I mean, you have a constitutional right to vote, constitutional right to a firearm. And, I mean, who's the distinguished character? What good character is?
Well, that's what I said. I mean, who decides what character
can't even
is?
Decide what gender they are at
Right,
this point.
right.
So,
Like,
I mean,
well,
I thought that was self-disclosure.
I'm pretty sure that that's part of what makes this all so dystopian by the Democrats, because they're going to say, oh, you're Dr. Rachel Levine. You're like Assistant Health Secretary of the United States of America. You were a dude. Now you're a woman. Oh, we don't need your social media accounts because you're the right gender, which is no gender. So therefore, we're going to give you a gun, a concealed carry. But that guy over there who lives in an unsafe neighborhood, who's a law-abiding citizen, we're not going to let him have a gun.
Well,
No,
I mean,
of course
we
not.
could probably run some algorithms and just cut all this off. If you're predominantly a male, white, pickup truck, watch the NFL, maybe like you made a reference to God or go to church or something like that, don't even bother applying.
Right.
I mean, that's
exactly.
basically what they're saying.
That's literally what they're saying.
Right.
And they're literally flipping the bird to the Supreme Court of the United States.
Right.
That's what and
Well,
the
like I
thing
said,
is,
it's got like you don't control me. This is how the left. They're Marxists.
They're Marxists. And you know what's interesting about this is, and this is important for podcast listeners. Remember, ladies and gentlemen, New York State has it's a big state. It has an enormous number of Republicans. A lot of people don't realize this, but in Long Island, which a lot of people say is, they confuse with New York City. Long Island has I think 2 or 3 million people. I don't recall the exact population.
Well, I'll tell you,
there are an enormous number of Republicans just on Long
I think
Island,
it was only-
let alone New York State.
I think it was only like maybe 6 years ago. The New York State legislature was Republican.
It was Republican majority, and then it flipped Democrat. And the first opportunity the Democrats got, they're trying to shut down free speech, shut down the Second Amendment, literally cancel the police. I mean, one stupid thing after another. And this is why I feel so bad. There are so many Republicans and so many reasonable people that live in New York State who are affected by this idiocy. It's like as we've played many times before in the past, the idiocracy, right? I mean, the dumb people are in charge and they just keep dumber.
But
Wow.
honestly,
That's right.
I don't.
Rondo.
Well, at this point, I don't even
Rondo's
think
got what plants crave. It's got electrolytes.
I don't even think they're dumb. This is just an evil plan.
It is evil.
And this is part of their roadmap.
Final thoughts on this.
Well, I mean, it's obviously they're smarter than the Supreme Court and normal people. Crime is running rampant in their area. They can't control it, and they want to stop people from defending themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's the last word for Mark and the Millennials. And that is the dumbest bill in America, requiring gun buyers to provide their social media handles. And that's it from Mark and the Millennials. Thank you for joining Mark and the Millennials. This is Mark Fisher. Thank you to our producer, Christopher Hopkins, and our guest, Matt Morgan. Check us out on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, Getter, Truth Social, Rumble, and our website. See you next time.